right, I don't have 75 slides. That was not a slight. I just only have like 10 because I'm not an engineer, so there's also that. Before I get started, I'll just tell you a little bit about my background. I have a bunch of startups because that's what people with ADD do. They have a million ideas and then try and make them happen. So I actually have been working in the healthcare space for, I'm going to say, a little bit over 15 years, and I have had the good fortune or misfortune, depending on how you look at it, of being in senior leadership roles in almost every aspect of the healthcare delivery system in the United States. So to that end, I have been a senior leader in the health insurance market. I have been a senior leader in a national healthcare delivery system, and I've also launched and commercialized products in the United States in women's health. So, and I've also done policy work, and I'm currently in the middle of doing a doctorate in public health and health systems development. So yeah, I'm a bit of an overachiever and try and do a little bit of everything, right? So I became really fascinated by blockchain a couple of years ago, and having worked throughout the healthcare system, wanted to find ways that we could create sort of a thread that allowed us to take these disparate systems and find a way to provide better health care for everyone. And so to that end, I believe that healthcare is a human right, and that we can hopefully use this technology, blockchain technology, to make the world a better place and improve population health globally. So let me tell you a little bit about Remedy. Remedy is a life sciences blockchain company. They are not a white paper blockchain company. They are a real system with real customers using their protocol. So there are people all over the world who are using their protocol to conduct research, to navigate their way through the regulatory system, and to improve global population health. You can read on that slide a little bit about some of that stuff. So as I said before, we've got a lot of work that happens in the research space. We have a lot of work that happens in the regulatory space. Remedy's protocol is really about trying to make a lot of these processes more efficient, more transparent, increase the traceability and trackability of the data that we collect, and make the information more available so that we can make improvements to systems and processes. On the protocol right now, this is kind of a sample of what we have. We've got some clinical research stuff. There's a lot going on in the real-world evidence space, the manufacturing space, distribution, stuff around healthcare outcomes, because it is why we're doing this in the first place, and then opportunities to be able to create better payers and more easier ways to finance some of the things that happen in the healthcare industry. So we sort of look at things from a couple of different angles. From the company internal perspective, so that's like working with manufacturers to figure out how we can improve logistics or improve production costs or reduce production costs. From a regulatory perspective, how do we make it easier for regulators to understand what's happening? How do we collect data and present it in a way that makes it easy to go through an FDA approval process? And then finally on the B2B side. And in the B2B space, we're looking at ways that we can improve patient outcomes or use track and trace to better understand what's happening with specialty drugs or specialty medicines or devices or diagnostics. And so I wanted to spend my real time today talking about one of our first use cases, and that is the eradication of hepatitis C in Mongolia. So in this case study, Mongolia, about 2017, decided that they wanted to set out to be the first country globally to eradicate hepatitis C from its population. And they wanted to do this by 2020. Now, it's not a very big country. There's about 3 million people in Mongolia, and they're with a prevalence of about 5%, we're looking at just over 260,000 people who have hepatitis C in the country. The challenge being that Mongolia is geographically dispersed and people live in rural areas that are very difficult to reach. So the ability to be able to not only test and diagnose is really challenging. So this project actually integrates all three of those aspects that I mentioned here. So the first one, we had to think about how we could look at this patient process and figure out where the efficiencies should come. So how do we do screening? But how do we do screening in field with rapid diagnostics? But then once we got that information, how were we able to make sure that person has access to health care? And then, do they really even have hepatitis C? One of the issues that we found is that there's a 20% error rate on those tests. And sometimes that could be because of user error. Sometimes it could be because of a faulty manufacturing process. And so we had to work with all of these partners. So on the company internal, on the manufacturing side, we had to be able to track that drug, that device, or diagnostic or drug, so that we were able to guarantee or ensure or mitigate any challenges with defects in the actual product itself. We then had to work with, let me go back here so you can see some of our partners. As you can see, we're working with the government of Mongolia, the Ministry of Health, MONOS, who's a manufacturer, the Onam Foundation, who's on the ground, and the Mongolian Liver Center. So that pulls in all those different types of relationships. We've got the B2B relationships, because we have people who are out there on the ground delivering care. We have our manufacturing partners, because we need to guarantee to whatever extent we can or limit any issues with the product itself as it's moving into, from manufacturing to the patient. And then we need to have the government buy-in, because at the end of the day, they're paying for all of this. And they need to have visibility into the number of people who are being treated, because they've got to have this eradicated by 2020, which is next year, by the way. So this is what that looks like. It is it's a workflow process that goes from the manufacturer. You can see in the beginning up there. So we're able to track the rapid diagnostic test from the moment it was made, and then shipped, and then delivered. We then get to the point where we have our field technicians. These field technicians, what we were able to do with the manufacturer was put QR codes on the test. And so because our system is blockchain enabled, it allows, it's very simple. I don't have my phone, but if I did, you could just take a picture of the device, the actual diagnostic test. It's simple to use in field, and it allows the healthcare provider to have an immutable record of that test itself. And then we built in some redundancies, because we know that there are some errors that are associated with either the interpretation of the test or the test itself. So that test is then looked at by a healthcare professional who will take a good look and say, okay, yeah, it actually is. But they can see the actual test because it's inside the portal, and when you look inside, you see the actual test with the QR code, which, by the way, is attached to the patient record. So now we not only know where the genealogy, the immutable genealogy of the test itself from the manufacturer, because we were able to track that through our system, but we're also able to validate whether or not that test was positive or negative, and have two sets of eyes that look at it and say, yes, in fact, this person is positive. The process then goes through to viral load testing, and then eventually to bringing that person into the doctor. So what we've been able to do in our system is be able to track this entire process. And so we know that patient X did not go back to follow up for viral load testing, even though they had a positive test. And that means that our field workers can then go back out to that person and say, hey, you've got to go back to the doctors. We need to do another test to make sure this is right. And then you're able to access care. But having this system on the blockchain is what allows us to have the traceability of the patient and the diagnostic testing and the access to healthcare throughout the entire value chain. And this makes it really easy for the government to see how many people have been treated, especially when you're trying to get to the eradication of illness by 2020. It also makes it really simple to know when you get to that pharmacy whether or not there's drugs on hand. We will know whether or not that field worker has enough tests for the area that they're going to, and it can be shipped to them so that they have the supplies that they need. I wanted to be able to use some simple language about how we use blockchain to impact the health of a population by tracking and tracing this process, by creating mechanisms that allow each part of the system to speak to each other and to see and understand a process and where they are in the process allows us hopefully to get to a place where we can eradicate hepatitis C by 2020. So here are some of the benefits that we've seen. We've seen improved quality insurance because now we have the record of all the tests and everything else. We also know that we can control supply. We can make sure that it's distributed appropriately to those sites and people that need it. And we're able to watch that across the entire value chain. We actually have real-world evidence, which I think is really cool. We're actually able to see how we can impact the safety and efficacy for the regulatory industry, so they too can see the impact of this type of program, especially having it on the blockchain. And then we have cross-functional data, so we also have the ability for all of these different people to talk to each other. So if we know that if we have a person who's doing testing, and that person that's doing testing has a series of false positives or negatives, and when they're going to their second phase of validation, we can use that as an opportunity to go back and train that person if they're just not interpreting the test properly. So it creates a lot of efficiencies, but it also improves the process so that we're able to truly address health and the healthcare needs of people by making sure that the system is optimized for the healthcare environment that they're working in. And Mongolia is particularly tricky because of the sort of geographic distance between populations. So this is where we are. We've already built out the first part of the protocol. We're tracking the diagnostics all the way through. Our phase 2 is now to move into what are the real patient outcomes, because you need to test people and get them in before we can know whether or not this is all providing the outcomes of improved health for everyone. And then, of course, the payment part, because the government needs to pay for the people who are being tested and treated, and the healthcare workers need to be paid. And so there's lots of different mechanisms that we can use, smart contracting, to be able to make sure that we're ensuring that folks have access to healthcare and that the program has the desired responses that we intended. So I'm almost done. I've got like 2 slides left. So very quickly, because I've had the fortune to have worked on all of these aspects of the healthcare industry, I think a lot about how we improve it. At Remedy, we focus on the regulatory process. We figure out how we can make it easier to have drug approvals and streamline those processes for regulators and for researchers. We've got some robust tools that really help on the research side, so we're able to sort of track a molecule from its inception all the way to the creation of a drug. We're also able to, manage things like recalls or stockouts, so we know whether or not if a product was produced with a particular number, that lot number may have something wrong with it. It's a lot easier to then recall that product because we have a little bit more transparency into that product as well as where it's going. But bigger than that, as someone who focuses on healthcare, there's so many different ways blockchain technology can be used to improve the healthcare system. And I think one of the most basic and simple is the aggregation of data. And so, I would encourage you as you all go about your day and your work to figure out how you can make these types of improvements that improve population health or increase access to affordable renewable energy or whatever else it is you do. But for me, blockchain has been a really great way to apply structure to a system that operates, particularly here in the US, that operates in separate units. As I think as the technology evolves, we'll see more opportunity to string that stuff together so that we no longer have, a patient with a bad pacemaker who can't really get that information back to we don't know if it was a lot issue, if it was a production issue, or if it's just an issue with that one person. By using blockchain technology, it kind of eliminates a lot of those challenges in the real world delivery of healthcare. So I have 6 minutes left, so you are right on time right now. And that's it. Thank you.